Welcome everyone to today's training session, continuation of the successes and failures of grant writing. We're happy to have Victor and Gerald back today. Victor will give us some presentation on the failures of grant writing and what you can do next. But of course, as yesterday, the floor is always open to take questions during the presentation. We don't have to wait until the end. And when you do raise your hand to ask a question, you can just state where you're calling from and perhaps which H3Africa project you belong to. But thanks so much for joining us again today. It's much appreciated for this interesting sessions, and I'm glad it's meaningful from the responses and feedback we had yesterday. So Victor, over to you.
Thanks, Rolanda. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, you can hear you, Victor.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. So I don't have as many slides and as many bullet points as Gerald did yesterday. And I'd like to have a slightly different format for the presentation today. So at different times during the presentation, I'm going to ask for feedback from you, the participants. And since we have a fairly large number of participants, I count 25 right now, that would be 22, not counting Rolanda, Gerald, and myself. What I would ask you to do is every time I ask for feedback, and you'll see what that means, please type your response, your idea into the chat box. And please make sure that you have your chat box open. I have the list of participants on my screen. And if you want to do more or say more, please raise your hand. I can see whose hands are raised, so I can go to you and ask for your specific feedback or question. And occasionally I will pick a name at random from the list of current participants and ask that particular person to comment or give their opinion. I hope that these instructions are clear, and we're going to test them right away. So why? Why do you think proposals get rejected? You've just did a fantastic job putting a marvelous proposal together that has your latest ideas of what you want to do, what kind of research. Why do you think, what are the reasons why your proposal did not make the cut? So please type reasons you can think of into the chat box. Okay, limited funding. Lack of clarity, yes. Lack scientific merit, not meeting requirements, poor planning, not related to the scope of the funders, not eligible. This is great. So these are exactly the kinds of things that can happen. Yeah, there's also administrative reasons, but then usually your proposal won't even be reviewed. Not having a good team. These
what
are
if your
all,
proposal is about cock and bull torture?
can you repeat that, please?
What if your proposal is like cock and bull torture?
They will probably not even make it to the reviewers if it's really doesn't make any sense at all.
Why not though?
Huh?
Why not?
Because most funding agencies have initial filters. So somebody at the funding agency will actually have a look at the proposal. And if it's clearly cock and bull, as you say, they will not want
Cock
to
and bull.
bother the reviewers with that
Yep.
particular proposal.
Yep, I understand. Thank you.
Okay, so I think you hit most of the high points. I think this is really great. So I've listed a few reasons why proposals get rejected. The main one is, of course, the proposal was weak scientifically. And we'll get back later on what that really means. Second is the proposal did not address the requirements of the call. So there was a call that asked for proposals with a particular focus, and your proposal did not address all of the requirements that were outlined in the call for proposals. Sometimes proposals, even though the ideas are not bad, they're badly written, they're hard to understand, they look messy, and this gives a very bad impression to the reviewers. Sometimes you did not adequately explain your thinking. I mean, you think you did, but the language you used, the way you explained things did not get across what your idea really was. It also happens that it was the wrong review panel, and that the people who looked at your proposal did not really have the expertise to understand. They usually are smart enough to understand the science, but sometimes they don't know the field well enough to understand why this was really novel, why this really brought something new. Proposal meets all the funding criteria, it's good enough, but relative to all the other proposals that were there, it didn't rank high enough and there wasn't enough total money. So I think the answers I got in the chat box basically covered pretty much all of these reasons for proposals not making it to getting funded. So the second question is, what are really, and basically you say the proposal did not get a score that was high enough to merit funding. So what is this scoring based on? And I would like you again to start typing into the chat box the reasons you think, the criteria that you think are used by the funding agencies and the reviewers for scoring proposal. I can tell you that the review process is very structured for all of the funding organizations that I've been involved with. And as a reviewer, you get very precise instructions as to how you should score proposals. So there we go. Relevance to call, originality, feasibility, clarity, scientific impact, novelty, scientific merit, competence of the team. Again, all of these are absolutely correct. Translatabilities of findings to the setting, originality, novelty. Does the project meet the funder's goals? All of these things are. Institutional affiliation is never a scoring criterion. If your institution is not eligible, then the proposal will not get scored. I think these are all very good answers, and I'm very encouraged to see that you've been thinking about these things. So I'm going to give you the criteria, the specific criteria from two major funders. And the reason I'm picking these two, NIH and the European Commission, is that I've been involved both in writing proposals and evaluating proposals for both of these organizations. So for NIH, 5 criteria. First one is significance. How important is the question being addressed? Will the project improve scientific knowledge or technical capability? And I think you have all mentioned this. Second criterion is investigators. Are these the right people to do the project? Do they have the required expertise? What is their track record? How have they done before? It's not just have they published in good journals, but if they've been funded before, how well did the projects come out? What did the projects produce? Innovation. How novel is the approach? Does it introduce novel concept? Did they think of some really clever new techniques? Is this really going into directions that nobody has tried before? This is also an important criteria. It's not just, is this competent, but is this something special? Is there something new about it? The next one is, they call it approach, which is basically, is it feasible? Is it feasible with the budget they ask for? Are the experiments well thought out? Have they thought about all the things that could go wrong and how they could fix them if there are problems? Is this something that has is a very high likelihood to succeed? And finally, environment. Do they have access to the resources they need? Do they have the lab space? Do they have the equipment? Do they have can they get help if needed? Do they have resources on their campus or with their collaborators that are going to help make this all possible? Do they have enough office space even? Do they have proper computer networks? All of these things are also taken into consideration. So for the EU, actually, there's of course a big overlap with what NIH does. And just things are distributed a little differently. For the EU, there's 3 main criteria. The first one they call excellence. And this combines in a way, if we go back to the NIH, it combines the significance and the innovation criteria of NIH. So they ask things like, are the objectives clearly stated? Is the concept sound? And is the methodology credible? Does the project go beyond state of the art? So basically, the question here is this good science and is this innovative science? The second criterion is impact. And in the EU, impact has a lot to do with whether this particular proposal actually meets all the expectations that were outlined in the call. So how closely do they really, how well did they look at the call, and how closely did they hew to the expectations that were outlined as to what the impact of their research should be on the it usually has to do with the competitiveness and technical capabilities of the European Union. And of course, they're also interested in seeing, is the project likely to impact science and society beyond these? So do they go beyond what the expectations were and come up with things that are really going to make an impact that were not necessarily listed there? But if they haven't hit all the right buttons for what was expected in the first place, the proposal will not get scored very well. And the third is implementation, which is, again, mirrors the criterion from NIH. I can't remember what it's called, doesn't matter. But here the question is, again, is this something feasible? Is it realistic? Is the budget adequate? Did they think about the management structure? So how is this going to be managed? Who's going to keep track of who's doing what? Are the tasks distributed in a reasonable fashion? Do these guys know what they're doing? So even though the criteria are not identical, finally they hit many of the same notes. Okay, any questions at this point? If not, I think we have to go to the way they tell you why they didn't fund you. And summary statements is the term that NIH is using for the reviewer feedback. Different agency call it something different, but when your proposal is selected for funding or not selected for funding, you always get a report back that tells you with some level of detail why it didn't work or did work. And the comments you receive from the reviewers are really the most important piece of information to help you figure out why your proposal wasn't funding and what you can do about it. So even though you can get some additional information in other ways, this is the core of why your proposal failed. And this is really what you're going to have to rely on to make further decisions to a very large extent. Unfortunately, there are big differences between funding agencies in how much detail and how much detail they give you and how helpful the statements are. And again, the two that I know about, NIH and the European Commission, are extremely different. So I just see a question from Kevin, wanted to know what the average percentage of passed proposals in NIH and European Commission. This very much depends on the call. Some are more competitive than others. It depends on how much funding they have, how many proposals they receive. But as a rule of thumb, it's anywhere between 10 and 25% that get funded. In some extreme cases, it's even less than 10%. So if you don't get funded, I'll come back to that, but if you don't get funded, you're definitely in the majority, no matter what the call is. Okay, back to the slide. The summary statements from NIH are extremely detailed, very helpful. They have summary statements, they have opinions of individual reviewers, they have scores from individual reviewers. The only thing is that with NIH, if your proposal on first reading did not look like it was going to make the top half of all proposals, they may just give you a very short summary statement saying, sorry, but this isn't good enough, and you will not get detailed reviews. But if it passes that kind of midway score, then you will get very detailed information back. The European Commission, unfortunately, the summary statements are extremely formulaic and not very helpful. But they do tell you on which criteria you passed or failed. And the reason for this is that the European Commission has had some very bad experiences with scientists who appealed the decisions and took the summary statements as arguments to say that the reviewers were prejudiced or that they didn't know what they were talking about, or that, you know, maybe they made comments that were seen as being insulting or whatever. So in order to avoid these problems, if you are an expert for the European Commission, you are told very clearly that you have to make summary statements that don't say too many negative things. Okay, so this is just the header of an evaluation, a summary statement that came back from NIH. This is a real one. And the reason I'm showing this is that I was actually involved in preparing this particular proposal. It's 4 years old, so I don't think that there's any confidential information in this. And the important thing here, if you look at where my mouse cursor is and what I highlighted is what they call the impact score. Now at NIH, scores go from 1 to 9, 1 being absolutely outstanding and 9 being absolutely terrible. And for some reason, then this gets multiplied by, well, the procedure is that each individual reviewer gives a score for each of the 5 criteria. In this case, this was a training grant, so there were probably additional criteria. And then during the panel session where the proposal is discussed, they converge on a consensus score that is not necessarily the average of the scores that were given by individual reviewers. By the way, the European Commission works exactly in the same way. Each reviewer goes through the proposal independently at first, gives it a score, and then in the panel session, the reviewers justify their scores, then they compare them, and they gradually converge towards a consensus. So in the NIH system, a score of 45 is about in the middle of the range, absolutely not fundable. Typically, if you score over 30 at an NIH review panel, you will not get funded. This is what they call the resume and summary of discussion. This is the consensus opinion of all the reviewers in the panel. I'm not going to go through this, but they basically tell you what the reviewers liked and what they didn't like. And finally, it tells you that why you got the score you got at the end of the day. This is just the beginning of the critique of one of the panel members. Of course, you never know who the panel members are. They don't tell you. This particular panel member gave scores of 4, 4, 3, 3, and 2 to the 5 criteria that they had to use for evaluation, because this was a training grant. It's not the criteria that you saw before. So this was a relatively good score. If you average it out, it would be a score of about 32, 33, something like that. Other panelists did not like the proposal as well. And each of the critiques is about 1 to 2 pages long. So I just showed you the overall impact statement, but not all the details that come afterwards. So I see the question from the header you've shown had terrible scores. No, they're not terrible scores. It had the average score was 4.5. 4.5 is good, but not exceptional. Terrible scores would be much higher than that. Okay, this is what you get from the European Commission. You get scores in the range of 0 to 5, with 0 being the worst in this case and 5 being the best. We're only allowed to give scores in increments of 0.5 point, so no decimal points. And this particular proposal had a total score of 8.5 out of a maximum of 15. The threshold for being fundable is at 12. So this proposal didn't come even close to the threshold. So on the first criterion, excellence, it got a score of 3 out of 5. It needed to get at least 4 to be considered for funding. On the second criterion, impact, the score it got was 3.5 out of 5. It needed at least 4 to be considered for funding. And on criterion 3, which is the implementation, it got 2 out of 5. And the threshold there is 3. So this particular proposal scored below the threshold for every single one of the criteria. By the way, all it takes for a proposal not to be considered for funding is to score below the threshold for one of the 3 criteria. And this is the sum total of the feedback that the applicants got. And as you see, relative to NIH, and again, I'm not going to go through this, and there's absolutely no reason why I should, but these are very terse statements, basically saying not good enough. And for the implementation, it actually did say the quality of the work plan is very poor. So you can see that there's actually a lot going on in terms of the review process to come to a consensus score, and then to document why this score was given, and then to provide feedback to the applicants. And I agree that what you get back from the European Commission is not terribly useful, but at least gives you some idea. What you get back from NIH is absolutely wonderful. You have everything there, both from the individual reviewers and from the consensus panel, to tell you exactly what went wrong with your application. So this particular slide, I just went to the website of NIAID, which is one of the NIH institutes, and looked at the advice they give what to do when your proposal doesn't get funding. And there's pages and pages of it, but this is kind of a quick summary. And you first have to assess, and then you have to decide. So first thing to assess is kind of what were the problems? What were the things that what are the reasons why we didn't get funded? And you have to kind of go through the statements and get into your head of what actually happened here. And then you ask the questions, are these problems fixable? And was this application reviewed by the right people? And if you think that the problems are fixable, and or that maybe I see a question saying, how do you determine if the review panel was appropriate? You don't get to know who the people on the review panel were. What you do see is their remarks. And if you get the feeling that they really did not quite get what it was that you were proposing, and they did not get why this had an impact, then you have a reasonable guess that maybe this wasn't the right panel. And what they tell you here is talk to your program officer. This is true at NIH, it's true at Wellcome Trust. It's not true in the European Commission. The European Commission, you don't have a program officer that you can talk to figure out what went wrong. But in many funding agencies, you know who the person in charge of managing the review process was, and you can go send an email, give a phone call, and have a friendly chat with the program officer, who will tell you, if you hadn't figured it out already from reading the summary statements, what the things were that that were discussed by the panel that basically brought on the decision not to fund your proposal. And once you have all this information, you can then make decisions. Now, if the reviewers misunderstood your proposal at NIH, and this is very specific to NIH, I don't think there's any other funding agency that will do this. you have an opportunity to resubmit your application, fix the problems, the clear problems that the reviewers found, and ask for a different review panel. And the NIH does publish lists of their review panels and the membership of the review panels, but not who will sit in a particular session. And you can say, I think this particular group of people would be the right people to look at my particular application. Now, if it was not an issue with the reviewers, the second decision stop is, are the problems that the reviewers noted fixable? Is this something that I can address? I look at this, and these problems I think can be fixed. And actually the next couple of slides, I'm going to go a little bit through what is fixable and what isn't. Okay, so before I start, okay, I see another question from NIH. NIH does not have cutoff scores. So the review process at NIH is different from that at the European Commission in the sense that they don't say, if you don't get a score of at least this much, we will not consider your proposal. At the NIH, they look at all of the different criteria, and then they give you an overall score. And that overall score will dictate whether it's fundable or not. And basically, the way they work it is they start with the proposals with the lowest scores, which are the best, quote unquote, and then they gradually go up the list. Sometimes they may bump a proposal even though it got a score a little less than another one, just because among the program officers, the NIH people, they feel that this is a particular topic that they really would like somebody to work on. So they may have priorities at NIH that they give them a little bit of license to fund proposals that are not directly in the scoring order. I hope this answers your question. Okay, so before I go into the list of fixable and not fixable problems, let's start with fixable problems. Can you use the chat boxes now to make suggestions about problems that you think are fixable? So your proposal got rejected, you get all the reviews back, and they tell you the things that the review panel feels are wrong with your proposals. What are the things that you think are fixable? I have only one answer so far. Technicalities. Budget is not a scoring criterion. People involved in the project, yeah, definitely. Clarity, yes. Scope alignment, yes. Any other ideas? Investigators, yes, to some extent, yes. So the answers from Blessed are, they're not necessarily fixable. I mean, if your research question is considered not to be interesting, there's nothing you can do about it. You cannot fix that. Feasibility, yes, if you can refine your approach. The environment is difficult to change. Your environment is what it is. I mean, your university is what it is. Clarification protocols, originality. Yeah, originality is not fixable. If it's not original, it's not original. You can't fix that. Okay, very good answers again. So let me go through a few of the okay, yeah, that's what we said. Think about issues in your proposal that may be fixable. So poor writing or presentation. I can guarantee you that if your proposal is poorly written, doesn't have clear graphics in it, is full of grammatical problems, it will get rejected. And that's fixable. There has to be a way to fix it. So in this case, work with a professional editor and you can fix it. There might be missing expertise in the team, and you can fix that by adding collaborators with the right profile, keeping in mind that you may not have the budget to add collaborators and actually pay them. There might be missing details in the experimental plan, things that you hadn't thought through completely, and that you can fix because you can make it more robust. Insufficient discussion of pitfalls. And this is very important. You may not have thought, okay, what happens if this particular approach doesn't work? Or you want to do experiments in this way and you can't, or you think you have access to this particular population and finally you don't. So I think it's extremely helpful to think about the things that could go wrong and to then put in your proposal the way you're going to deal with these potential problems. Poor fit to the call. And of course, you're not going to resubmit to the same call, but you may be able to take your proposal as is pretty much and find another call or another funding agency where the research you propose to do will be a better fit. And finally, the mismatch expert panel, we already mentioned that. Okay, but now what are the non-fixable problems? You have some ideas of, I mean, some were already put into the chat box. For example, originality. Originality is not fixable. If your concept is wrong, it's not fixable. If your research questions are not important or interesting, that's not fixable. Can you think of some other things that are not fixable? Okay, not a lot of responses. Lack of expertise can be fixable if you bring in people with the right expertise. But if the PI knows nothing, of course, about, if the PI himself is not qualified, that's not fixable. Significance of the project, yeah, that's absolutely true. Okay, how about Kennedy Mrangi? Kennedy, do you have an idea?
Okay, yeah. So most of the things that are not fixable have been mentioned, such as the originality, the one that we had initially. And currently, I'm still thinking about it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's put a few things on the screen here. So most of what I've put in these slides, I got straight from NIH. So this is not just me taking things off of the top of my head. So the fixable problems were also suggestions from NIH. So the hard to fix problems, low impact research topic. So, you know, this is something that might be of interest to some people, but there's a general feeling it's not going to make a big difference on science worldwide. Philosophical issues. So the reviewers do not think the work is important. This is somehow related to the first one. This might still give you a chance to submit elsewhere. You certainly cannot resubmit to the same funding agency if the reviewers that they had think that this is not an important piece of work. One very important one is, and I have unfortunately seen this in concept proposals from African scientists more than once, is that the hypothesis they formulate is not really supported by the data. And this is now a quick parenthesis, but in most funding agencies, they really want you to have already some preliminary data that show that what you want to do is actually feasible, and that you know what you're doing and you're going in the right direction. Work has already been done, and this happens unfortunately quite often. People don't know the literature. So what they're proposing to do, if you look through, if you search through the literature in a comprehensive enough fashion, you realize that the work has already been done by somebody else, and so therefore there's no novelty. Sometimes also, the way you propose to test a particular hypothesis just is not going to work. So it's not that your implementation has technical problems. It's just that if you do the experiments that you're saying you're going to do, you will not be able to answer the question that you asked. And I think I'll add an additional one here, is that the hypothesis is not clearly stated. So again, this is something I've seen more than once. People say, well, I have this particular collection of samples, and I have this particular, I know how to do this particular set of experimental techniques. So I'm going to analyze all of my samples with this set of techniques, and I'm going to put all the results in a database. I've seen many proposals that look like that. And this is never going to pass muster because there is no hypothesis. It's basically a blind data gathering exercise that is not designed to answer a specific response. So I see from Blessed an answer saying the environment is not fixable, and she cites a specific example of having a good set of collaboration. I think that, but that still the reviewer said the environment was not suitable. I think when something like this happens, the way to address it is to put very clearly in the proposal what is going to be done where, and how that, where this particular part of the project is being done, does in fact have the right environment to do that particular part of the project. So it's not just who you put together as collaborators, but also how these different infrastructures are going to be leveraged to actually make your proposal a reality. And sometimes there are issues just with, yes, these are the right people, these are the right places, but how you're going to, in practical terms, how you're going to get all of the samples from here to there, or how you're going to do these analyses. I'll give you an example. Is a proposal I saw not so long ago where they were proposing to study the behavior of a particular type of flies that are found in northern Kenya at the lab in the UK. And there was nothing in the proposal that said, so they had somebody in the right region in Kenya to, to work with the flies, and they had people in the UK who knew everything about how to study fly behavior, but they had never thought about how you're going to actually get the flies from Kenya to the UK within their lifespan, and how you're going to do this without perturbing their behavior. I mean, what I'm saying is that even though you may have all the right people and all the right institutions, you may not have worked out how they're going to actually be working together. I see a comment from Pablo, and yes, it's being assertive and acting brave and everything, like all of this is true. But if you don't know what you're doing and the reviewer spot it, you're still going to have a problem. So yes, you have to convince the reviewer that you're the best person to carry out a project. And there is a part of craftsmanship in putting together a proposal that looks, where you make the point that you as a person have the right expertise, you have access to the right samples, you're in the right place, and so forth and so on. And it's important to make those points, but this still has to be the truth. It's not just projecting an image. Okay, I see there's a question from Kevin again. I'm not sure what the question is here. I mean, if there are ethical issues, clearly these are things that are actually, I know for the European Commission, there's a separate set of boxes to tick showing that there are no ethical issues with the proposal. So this is not part of the evaluation of the quality of the science. This is part of ticking boxes to make sure that, if, are there human subjects? If there are human subjects, are all the does it have the approval of all the relevant institutional review boards? Are there stem cells involved? If so, where do they come from? How have they been procured? Does this follow all the rules, and so forth and so on? So ethical issues are taken into account, but not necessarily part of the evaluation of the scientific merit of your proposal. I hope that answers the question. Okay, we're getting gradually towards the end of this presentation, and that will leave a fair amount of time for questions if needed. But the last part I want to address is, okay, now you have figured out what the problems were, you figured out whether they were fixable or not. You have made your decision as to whether you're going to try to fix those problems. So what are your options now? And so what can you guys think of? And please, again, type into the box what your options are. Your proposal came back. It's not going to get funded. What do you do now?
Hi, it's Kevin. Can I say something?
Sure.
Yes, I mean, if I receive a notification saying that my proposal cannot be funded, I only have two options. First, if I understand the problem is not fixable, so I may change the topic or write something else like differently. Depends of the reason. If, for example, the originality of my proposal wasn't something interesting, I need to look at something original. So that will be the first for me. And um, the second for me will be uh, collaborate with somebody else, like be a part of the project, but in a way I can learn more to reapply one day to something different. Yes, that will be the two option I will have. Oh God.
It looks like we lost Victor there for a minute. We should see if he comes back. So let me share my screen with Victor's slides. But wait, let me not do that. Because Victor should be. Right, in the meantime, I guess we can read the comments on in the chat box. So consider the review. So yes, the last questions were, what do you do next after your grant is not funded? Consider the reviewer's comments and decide whether you need to resubmit to the same funder or elsewhere. Fix the issues and submit elsewhere or same funder the next grant. Review the reviewer's comments. So basically, this seems like a follow-up from your previous comment. Papalo says, do not copy and paste from old applications or project proposals. Analysis will not have the same flow and will be rejected again. Lucinda is commenting on the fixable and not fixable aspects, such as hypothesis. John is saying leverage reviewer comments, revise and submit elsewhere if problems are not fixable. Make improvements based on reviewer feedback and be ready to submit to another funder once the call is made. Cross. So people go ahead and submit appeals. Right, so that is actually very interesting. On what grounds do you think you can submit an appeal? Gerald, do you have commenting?
Yeah, some people may take it that they were judged unfairly in the process. And I think in some cases, some funders do accept appeals on a case-by-case basis, while others don't. So it's always important.
Okay, I'm sorry, I had a system crash on my computer.
That's not good.
I had to reboot, which took me a few minutes. So bear with me. We're almost finished anyway, but I would certainly like to have time to have some questions. And okay.
So, in fact, Gerald was just commenting on the grounds of when people can submit an appeal.
Right. So, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, you can see it.
Okay, I'm going to go into slideshow mode. Okay, this is where we left off. And thanks, Gerald, for keeping up the discussion. And my apologies for, I'm not sure this happened yesterday also. And okay, so let's go to what the options are. And the first one, and I think from what Ananda just said, this is something that Gerald mentioned, appeal the funding decision. Basically saying this is not fair, this was good science, there is no reason to, and the comments of the reviewers are totally biased and so forth and so on. Now, this happens, people do it. My take on it is it's a terrible idea because appeals very rarely succeed and they are absolutely guaranteed to turn the funding agency against you. So unless it's a funding agency where you never want to apply for another grant, I think that this is probably not something that you want to do. The second option, and this is basically when you feel that the problems based on the reviewer comments, your discussion with the program officer and so forth and so on, you think this is fixable. So basically you take your proposal, you fix the problems, and you resubmit to either the same funding agency or a different one. Now, most funding agencies have calls that are that do not renew automatically. So they will want proposals on one particular topic and addressing one particular set of questions at one point and something a bit different at another point. So it is not usual that you're able to resubmit your proposal to the same call of the same funding agency. It does happen though, and NIH definitely does have that option if the call is still open. And I'm not going to go into all the conditions for doing this, but basically you have the opportunity, sorry, my slide advanced. You have the opportunity to resubmit your proposal formally with the same title, the same topic, and some specific rules as to how you address the critiques of the reviewers. And basically, this is in the document itself, in the proposal itself, you mark where you made changes and why, and how this addresses the critiques that you received. But as I said, this is an somewhat unusual situation. But if you had a good proposal with fixable problems, revising and resubmitting it is usually not a bad idea. The third option is a little more serious, and there might be problems there that were not easily fixable. But you still see that there was a good concept somewhere, that it has that your proposal had a bunch of strengths, that the reviewers, there are some reviewers that really liked it. They pointed out the things that they liked. And then what you can do is revisit really the proposal, not just revise it, but write a new proposal, but you reuse a lot of what you put together for the initial proposal, but add things, remove things, maybe revisit the goals a bit, realize that there's one set of experiments that you should absolutely include that you hadn't thought about before, that maybe you needed access to more samples that were not included before, and so forth and so on. So there's an opportunity to take the proposal that you had and to make some new with some old. And then the last, of course, is that you realize that, you read the reviewer's comments, you go through the literature, somebody tells you, this has already been done. This is really a bad idea. There's no hypothesis here, whatever. There's some really terminal critiques. And when you realize that this was a poor proposal to begin with, then just forget about it, ditch it, and move on and start another one from scratch. Babajo, I see you have your hand up.
Hi, Victor. Just number 2, revising your proposal and resubmitting it to either the same funding agency, addressing the critiques that the reviewers gave you, or a different one. So, like, obviously with grants, usually you have to respond to a call. You don't approach the NIH and say, hey, I have an idea. Here's my grant proposal. There has to
You're wrong.
What do you mean?
What I mean is that NIH has actually, contrary to many others, actually Wellcome Trust does this also. If you have a great idea, you can send a proposal to NIH without responding to a specific call.
Okay.
Certainly under the R01, R03, and R21 funding scheme, they have what they call parent announcements. And you can address any topic that you want, as long as it's a topic that's of interest to NIH, to one of its component institutes. And you can say, of course, you have to say which institute you're targeting. You can say which review panel you think would be appropriate. And you have 3 opportunities every year to make proposals.
Okay. So, Victor, I wasn't aware about that. Thank you for educating me, because I didn't know about the NIH particularly. But now I'm thinking about, besides the NIH, because I mean, it's not only the NIH that funds scientists or gives out calls for grants. My question then is, if it's not the NIH, another funding call that's been out there, either from the EU or something, that I'm responding to and I get rejected, now, why should I resubmit if the call closed, right? So like, they're already given money to those that succeeded, or they didn't maybe award anyone because maybe all the grant proposals were poor. So then what's the motivation of resubmitting when already I failed, and 2, the call date has closed, like perhaps 2 months even now that they've replied to say, Pablo, you were rejected. Why should I resubmit? What's the motivation for that?
Okay, it's a good point, Babayo. I think that, and I should have been clearer in how I formulated this. It really depends on whether there is another funding opportunity, another call where your particular research idea would be a good fit. So sometimes the calls are so prescriptive that there's absolutely no way that this particular proposal could be funded under a different call. If I take the example of H3A Binet, for example, there was a very specific call and they wanted a very specific set of criteria to be met, and there's no way you can resubmit then. But if you submit it to a call that was very broad in its scope, it's very possible there will be another call that's very broad in its scope, or there will be opportunities for free submission. And it's not just NIH. I'm pretty sure Wellcome Trust, for example, has opportunities for proposing things where you do not have to justify the details of what you're proposing to respond to a particular call. So it's not that common, but it's certainly possible. At NIH, you can calls are often open for several years, so you can revise and resubmit to the same call. Does that answer your question?
No, thank you so much. That was helpful. Thank you, Victor.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Feel free either to type into the chat box or to raise your hand.
Victor?
Yes.
I have a question. So this might be for more junior type of grants, but are there cases where if your proposal is not accepted for this round, sometimes it could be automatically accepted a second time round and still in the pool, or does that
I don't know of any funding agency that does that.
Okay.
So basically, if your proposal is not funded in one particular round, it does not automatically get put in for funding in a subsequent round for the same. Basically, every funding agency I know of, if they have calls that are open for a while, if you resubmit, you have to justify why you resubmit, what you did to address the issues that were noted with your first submission, and it goes back into the pool.
Okay.
And I did not, for this particular session, go into all of the details of with NIH. There are some very specific rules as to what you can and cannot do. There's a maximum number of times you can resubmit. There's special codes that get attached to your submission if it's a resubmission of an existing proposal, and so forth and so on.
Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
I was wondering, this may be rare, but does it happen? Did it happen once? Maybe once that a proposal has been rejected by one reviewer and accepted by another. I understand the details of the criteria can be, small, but the score could be small, but the fact is the proposal has been rejected somewhere and has been accepted somewhere else.
So that's the whole point of having these consensus panels. So there's no funding, so it happens all the time that reviewers disagree. I've been in any number of panel discussions where for one particular proposal, some reviewers thought it was quite good and other reviewers thought it was terrible. There were huge differences in the scores that were given by different reviewers. And that's the whole point of having the panels in the first place. So you have a bunch of people gathered together in a room, and their job is to arrive at a consensus for each of the proposals that they're working with. And so there's a lot of give and take between the experts, you know, in terms of what are the weaknesses, what are the strengths, what are the reasons for giving a better score or a worse score. Sometimes there are votes being taken. Sometimes there are interventions from the program officers. By the way, the program officers never have the right to vote or to even try to influence the score for a particular proposal upwards or downwards, but they can try to help people reach compromises. And so the answer to that is there is never the case where there are disagreements between reviewers always get resolved by finding a common ground between the reviewers and an agreement on a consensus score for that particular proposal. Does that answer your question?
Yes, but I can say like in part because maybe I didn't explain myself well. Like let's say, for example, EU and NIH. Is there any possibility that a proposal can be accepted for what by one, like by EU and rejected by NIH? Did something like this happen once?
Well, for one thing, it's never going to be the identical proposal. So because the requirements are very different between the agencies. So basically, if you're trying to fund the same research from two different funding agencies, it's allowed. But if both funding agencies decide that your research is worth funding, then you immediately have a conflict of interest because you have made parallel promises to two different funding agencies, and you have to decline one or the other.
Exactly. But if I apply first to NIH and they reject it, and then I apply to EU and they accept it, that's the situation I'm asking.
That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Okay. I was asking if something like that can be possible, or there is communication between both.
No, the only case where there's a problem is if you get funded at the same time by two different funding agencies.
Okay, yeah.
And then you have a conflict of interest, and you have to communicate. You have to decline your grant with one or the other.
Yeah.
Okay, I see another question here. So reason for not funding could be due to availability of funds. Absolutely true. But it also means that if your particular proposal doesn't get funded, it's because there were a bunch of other proposals that were scoring higher. So it's not necessarily that your proposal was bad. It's because there were a lot of proposals or enough proposals that were better than yours that were competing. And you still get the critiques from the reviewers telling you why they gave you the scores they did. I'll give you an example with NIH. Let's say that you have a particular call where they're going to fund, there's going to be enough money available to fund 5 proposals. Actually, if you look at the calls for proposals at NIH, they usually tell you how much money they have and how many proposals they can fund with that. And they always put in the proviso that if they don't get enough that are good enough, they're not going to fund all, they might fund fewer, but they're never going to fund more than they have money for. So if you don't make the threshold and that call is a one-time call, then that's the end of the road for your particular project. If this is an ongoing, so that there's going to be a second round of funding under the same call, this happens also, then you're perfectly fine improving your proposal and resubmitting it, hoping that this time it will score well enough that it's going to get funded. I see another question here. What happens if you have a bright idea but no proven expertise? Yes, this happens. If you just put a proposal together by yourself, it's not going to go anywhere. So how do you get around that? The first one, there's several ways you can do it. One is to associate yourself with somebody who does have proven expertise and who supports you and who helps you put together your proposal. Another really important thing is that you should have an opportunity to gather some preliminary data that show that your bright idea actually is something that is feasible. So you can start collecting data. You may be able to get institutional funding from your university, or you might find somebody around the world, a lab that says, you tell them, I really would like to do this. What do you think? It's in, in their area. They said, yeah, we'll bring you in for a year as a postdoc or whatever, so you can start getting data on this. There's many ways around it. But if you just have a bright idea and no expertise in that area, there's no way you're going to get funded. Does that answer your question? Okay, do publications in different areas other than the field you're proposing contribute to success of your proposal? They do. They do to the extent that the publications show that you're able to manage successfully a research project. So even if the papers are not in the exact area where you're making the proposal, it's useful to see that you are a capable and independent researcher. So it also depends what kind of paper it is. I mean, if they're papers that, I know, for example, that in the H3A BINET consortium, a lot of papers were published that show activities around education, data analysis, and so forth. Those don't show anything in terms of the author's capabilities to actually get experiments done. For example, so if you have a publication that is purely on an educational type project, and you're trying to get money to do experiments, that's not going to help you. It's not going to help you much. Is it a must to have a first author people for you to succeed? I think when you're trying to get independently funded, yes. And you have to have a track record of actually having done research successfully. And that is what being a grad student and being a postdoc is all about. These are the years where you can prove yourself. You can prove that you can handle a project, you can get experiments done, you can write a paper, you can analyze your data, that you are a functioning scientist. As we briefly mentioned yesterday, when you transition from being a graduate student to a postdoc, writing a proposal to fund your project as a postdoc, even if it funds only your salary, in most cases, it will fund only your salary, that makes a big difference. If you can show that the research you did as a postdoc was funded on the basis of a proposal that you wrote, with help, of course, from your mentor, that will make a big difference. But it's also true, to get back to the question, is that if at the point where you put together a research proposal as a PI, if you don't have any first author papers, your chances to succeed are pretty much zero. Okay, if you're applying for funding to start on a PhD, what will really matter is the quality and reputation of the lab that you're going to work in. Okay, good question from Gerald. Consequences of not delivering research objectives relative to the funded objectives. This is a very touchy area. One of my recurring complaints when I was reviewing projects for the European Commission is that we had no access to the actual track record of the applicants in managing previous grants they got. So they would say in their proposals, oh, I'm a very successful researcher and I've gotten funding from the European Commission for this many years. But there was no indication as to whether they had actually done anything. I mean, you can get funding and justify how you spend the money, but actually not produce anything. Now, I know that at NIH, they take very seriously not that you deliver the research objectives that you put in your proposal necessarily, but that the money they gave you leads to good science. So let's say that you make a proposal that is to a particular NIH institute that proposes to do a particular set of experiments. For whatever reason, that line of research didn't pan out very well, but you kind of rethought where you were going to go, and you actually made some really important discoveries in a somewhat related field. By NIH's standards, that is just absolutely fine, as long as you get nice results, you publish them, they have an impact, the community notices them. There are exceptions to that, the so-called U grants, where you have a very well-defined set of objectives. For example, all of the H3Africa grants are of the U series. There, the program officers will intervene. They will keep track of what you're doing. And if you don't deliver, they will give you stern warnings that you'd better deliver or else. And they might even, if you're completely going off the track, they might just cut the funding. They can cut the funding every year if they see that you're not going the way they were expecting you to go. The European Commission is notoriously lax in that as long as you deliver reports every year and the reports look halfway credible, they're not very effective at making sure that you actually deliver on all of the funded objectives. I think they're trying to change that, but my experience also, I've been in post-grant reviews where basically a project is near its end and everybody comes together, they tell you what they've done, and suddenly you realize that they really haven't done much of anything, or at least that some of the partners haven't delivered at all, and there isn't much you can do about it. Okay, I forgot that I had some final remarks which I want to address before our time is up. First one, remember that not having your proposal funded is by far the most likely outcome. You're always in the majority if your proposal doesn't get funded. Consider rejection to be part of a learning process. It's great to get the money, but not getting the money is also a useful step, because understanding why you didn't get the money will help you write a better proposal next time. Don't start blaming people around you. If your proposal failed, it's because you did something that wasn't optimal. And I'm not saying it's a failure, but the success or the failure of your proposal, if you are the PI, rests on you. There might have been glitches with your collaborators. There might have been reviewers that you don't agree with. There might have been administrators who weren't particularly helpful. But finally, when you don't succeed, it is on you. And realize that often the reasons for failure can be rather trivial. And when you analyze the reasons why your proposal didn't make it, make sure that you note mistakes that you may have made that weighed down the score that you got, and make sure that you don't repeat them. And the mistakes can have to do with how you presented things. It can have to do with making assertions that you could not back up from the literature. It can be stupid things like not giving full credit to people who in this field who have made previous important contributions. You never know. One of them might be one of the experts. There's all sorts of things that you can do that you should, when you think about it afterwards, you should say, I really shouldn't have done that. So learn also not to repeat the mistakes. Okay, I think this ends the presentation I wanted to make. I think we're also getting to the end of the allotted time. So, Rolanda, you want to take over?
Sure. I just want to actually end to say thank you so much, Gerald, and you, Victor, for presenting these topics. I think everybody really learned a lot because it's really engaging and people get to ask questions as they go along without feeling embarrassed or not having enough time. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time for giving us these opportunities. And then I also want to thank all the people on the call that attended these sessions. I'm really very grateful. I never know how the turnout will be. So I'm very, very happy that so many people turned up to attend these sessions. I don't know if there's anything from Gerald's side that you might want to say, and from you, Victor, before we close off.
Nothing from me, Yolanda.
Yeah, I want to just second you, Rolanda, in thanking everybody for being there. I was really concerned that, we'd end up in a session with 2 or 3 people. And, we have 40 participants is wonderful. Thanks very much for being here.
Yes.
All right.
All right. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon or morning, wherever you are. And please remember to register for the Research Professional webinar for tomorrow. And that will be taking place with Research Professionals Nick, who will be giving us that webinar. Thank you.